In a previous lecture, I've discussed how I've done more research than a PhD in regards to the origins of Paleo-Hebrew. This is just a picture to illustrate what I'm talking about and how much more extensively I have researched the origins of Paleo-Hebrew than that PhD honored professor. So, hope you understand where I'm coming from now. I found out on my last video that I forgot to put in the end credits that would request you to go to my website, www.travis-wayne-goodsell.weebly.com. So after 8 hours, I'm showing signs of wearing out. This is part 5 of Last Day's Warning to LDS Mormons from one of your own before April General Conference 2018, and part 5. So we're going to go on 10 hours now of working on this project, and these are a little over 2 gigs per video, so don't be surprised if it takes your computer a little bit of time to download, but it'll be a free download on my website. Hopefully I'll be able to get it in before midnight tonight. Lecture 1 was about Book of Mormon is good and exposes bad. Lecture number 2, the last day's signs are not being revealed by the prophets. And I also point out that Mormons who are not looking for the signs will be excommunicated, and we can see that that means they will be ripe for destruction, and that's the scriptural pattern. The Lord's chosen people become wicked by not taking care of the poor, neglecting the poor. They then are ripe for destruction. And as I've indicated, all the signs from the scripture prophecies have already happened now. They've come and gone, and now it's time for the destruction, because nobody has prepared, nobody has stood up to the Gadianton robbers who control our world, our government, and our church. So lecture number 3 was the collapse of the government. I pointed out specifically how our government has collapsed, that we are run by fascists. That's the fascist agenda runs our government. And lecture number 4, the collapse of the LDS Church. Plain and simple. You can't be corrupt and still think that you're favored of God, that you're infallible as a priesthood leader by virtue of having the office of the priesthood. It doesn't work that way. Sorry. Section 121. I went over that in great detail there. Alright, so now lecture number 5. Let's see, so as you can probably figure out from the previous lectures, I mentioned Brigham Young as the source of the corruption of the LDS Church. But you need to know a little bit of church history now, because the church history ain't telling us it. We've got to actually go back in time and look at what actually happened. And so, when a church leader is corrupt, he only has one authority given to him by God. Let's cover this real quick. And that authority for a corrupt leader is found in section 43 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Alright, and it's at the beginning, so I don't need to search through too much. Alright, so the revelation is to the elders of the church, and it's saying, ye have received a commandment for a law unto my church, speaking on behalf of the Lord, through him whom I have appointed. It's Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith, as the head of the church, is one who is appointed unto you to receive commandments and revelations from my hand. And this ye shall know assuredly, that there is none other appointed unto you to receive commandments and revelations until he be taken, if he abide in me. So only the president of the church, not the rest of the prophets, not the quorum of the 12, not 70, not the women of the church. So in general conference, only the president of the church gives revelations and commandments. So now, think about a traditional commandment that you believe the church has as their standards, and try to figure out which president of the church it came from. There's some homework assignment for you. You may recall one about single people should not hang out. Which president of the church said that? Give you a hint. None. But yet how many single people are still believing that they're not allowed to hang out with another single person of the opposite sex? So there you go. And there's a violation of the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because only the president of the church gives commandments. So as much as an apostle is good-hearted as he claims, he has no authority to give anybody commandments. As a member of the 12, he is specifically assigned to build up the churches throughout the world. That's it. Traveling ministers, what they were originally, until Brigham Young changed it into the standing 12 mixed with the traveling 12. And I'll get into that when we get into the history. But verily, verily, I say unto you, in verse 4, that none else shall be appointed unto this gift, except it be through him. For if it be taken from him, so it's not just a matter of him saying, I want you. No, it's if he is wicked, he shall have no power except to appoint another in his stead. And then it goes, and this shall be a law unto you, that ye receive not the teachings of any. That, and it should be who shall come before you, or, well, I guess it's referring to teachings in that sense, so it would be that, before you as revelations or commandments. So, only the president of the church. Have you noticed the change in doctrine during conference time? Follow the prophets. Not the prophet, the prophets. That's false doctrine. and it's being spoken right over the pulpits. And this is the passage. It's not my opinion, not my feelings, it's not my offended nature. This is from the canon text of Scripture, and it's being violated right before our very eyes. And in verse 6, and this I give unto you, that ye may not be deceived. Deceived. Where did we hear that before? Oh yeah, in Matthew. The signs of the second coming. And there shall be false Christs, false prophets, false teachers, who shall deceive, if possible, the very elect. Who are the elect? Oh, it must be the FLDS church. Oh, maybe it's the Protestant church. Maybe it's the Baptist church. Maybe it's Catholics. No, LDS. Who has prophets? Not the Catholics. None of the Protestant religions. None of Christianity. Only the LDS. So guess what? Jesus was prophesying that there would be a corruption in the latter-day church. And Joseph Smith is giving revelation as to how to detect it and prevent it from leading you astray, so that you would not be deceived by false prophets. But you gotta study the Book of Mormon. Book of Mormon, people. And you may know that they are not of me. So, not only have the prophets not given revelation, but all of the commandments that they're giving over general conference pulpits is not of God. It says so right here, right in this passage, in this Doctrine and Covenants. Alright, so knowing that it goes back to Brigham Young, who is the successor that Brigham Young chose, and how do we know that he's the successor? I needed to show you section 85. Alright, okay, I don't know if many of you know it, but there was an authority crisis after the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Joseph Smith chose Hiram to lead the church in case he were to die. The only problem is that they both died together. So who was to lead the church? Joseph Smith did not indicate it. Brigham Young said, well, the 12 apostles, according to section 107, have authority equal to the first presidency. That was not for leadership. And so the standing 12 were the ones that had leadership. And so, if anything, it would have gone to them to select the leader of the church. So Brigham Young, out of line, and I'll get more into that. But because of the authority crisis in 1844, the Mormon church that Joseph Smith restored has split off into at least 80 different groups that sociologists have identified. Okay, and so now, how did we get to this point in the first place? We need to go back to the leadership crisis of 1838. Nobody talks about that, and that's a crucial time period. in 1838, the church leaders were threatened by the Danites. The Danites were the members of the church who were converted by Brigham Young, and they were former Freemasons. And we need to then go back to 1826, but I also need to point out in 1838, Thomas B. Marsh, expressing his displeasure and frustration or anger with the Danites, was up and left. And so there was no wife with a cream scandal that has been popularized on the pulpits of the church. That was George Albert Smith who first brought that up, and that was decades after the actual incident. No, it was Thomas B. Marsh, the leader of the Traveling 12, of whom Brigham Young took over after he left because of the threat of the Danites that was destroying the leadership of the church, and so Thomas B. Marsh wanted nothing to do with the church as a result. And so when Brigham Young sent him orders to appear before a church court that Brigham Young held, not Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith was in jail at the time, Thomas B. Marsh refused to go, and so Brigham Young, on the 17th of March, 1939, officially excommunicated Thomas B. Marsh in his absence. So that's the real story of Thomas B. Marsh. Don't listen to anybody else telling you about cream milk that was stolen. That's not true. Alright, so 1826, and I think we'll need to do that for the next segment. Alright, so 1826, there is no recorded visit from Nephi. Yes, I said Nephi. Joseph Smith, and all of his post records after 1826, because he didn't write anything in 1826, all of his records about the incident were years after the event took place. And all of them said Nephi visited him. And it was not until after Joseph Smith died that a redactor came in and changed Nephi to Moroni. Just so that you know, and you can interpret it how you want, but the church obviously will claim that it was to harmonize it with the actual account. But if Joseph consistently was saying Nephi, I think we should believe it was Nephi that appeared in his bedroom, that appeared in the field when he collapsed, and that was there on the hill of Palmyra, Cumorah, I guess, the hill Cumorah, where he got the plates. And it was Nephi that was in charge of them, not Moroni. Alright, also in 1826, in March, Joseph Smith was arrested and charged with being a stone gazer. He had those two seer stones, and he was well known for going around and looking in them and saying, I can find your lost possession, I can find treasure. And he worked with a couple of different people digging for treasure. And if you dig deeper, you will find that what he was actually doing was working with his father, digging for dead bodies to give to a professor at a nearby university, of whom I believe they were related to that guy. And I think he was the one also who came to fix Joseph's leg as a child. Yeah, they were digging up bodies so that this professor at the university could perform experimentations on the dead bodies, so that we now have our anatomy textbooks based on people like this who examine deceased bodies. Back then, they had to do it in secret, and because a human body was sacred and needed to be buried and not exhumed and examined and all that stuff done to it. Now we have forensic scientists that examine bodies to determine cause of death, because there's a lot of corruption going on out there, and we need to make sure that people were not being murdered, that they died of natural causes. But that's how we got our anatomy textbooks. That's how we know so much about our bodies, is because of our forefathers who were doing experimentations on the human body. This is what Joseph, his family, were involved in to try to make money. And so there was nothing concerning visiting Nephi in 1826, and in March of that year he was arrested as a stone gazer, or whatever they called it, it was a misdemeanor offense according to the documented records from the court that are still available to examine. And he was charged a fine and was released. The jail is not in the same place as the courthouse. The jail is separate from the courthouse, and the jail was used for several different courthouses because in the time that Nephi was supposed to be visiting Joseph Smith, another man was arrested and was in the exact same jail that Joseph Smith was in, though he was in a different court for his case. That man was William Morgan. Now, William Morgan, it's a whole research subject in and of itself, because that man is the cause for the anti-Freemason movement that swept the colonies when he suddenly went missing after having been arrested, and he was arrested after he was going around claiming that he knew of a secret conspiracy to infiltrate the Scottish Rites Freemason movement. There are two Freemason movements: the Grand London Lodge and the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Those were the two main Freemason movements. Joseph Smith Sr. Was a Freemason in the lodge that covered the area where the jail of both Joseph Smith Jr., his son, was held, and where William Morgan was later held that year. And Hiram Smith was also a Freemason. And Hiram Smith, by the way, on his birth certificate, his name was spelled after the Freemasonry name of Hiram, Hiram, rather than Hy. So the Smith family were already involved in Freemasonry long before 1842 in Nauvoo. And so when you read in the Book of Mormon all of the Freemasonry symbolisms, you understand that, it's because the Smith family were Freemasons. They knew all about it. This anti-Freemason movement that was caused over the disappearance of William Morgan, because the Freemasons were implicated in his kidnapping, his disappearance, and even his faked murder. They found a body in Niagara, New York, in the waters, and it turned out to be a husband of another woman, but he was wearing William Morgan's clothes, and so it was apparent that somebody was trying to cover things up, and Freemasons were involved in that, and William Morgan had gone around telling people about exposing a conspiracy about the Freemasons, and the publisher that was going to publish the book of William Morgan was the one who paid for his release from jail, and published a book with his name attached to it that points out the rituals for the Freemasons, up to a Master Mason anyway, and that was supposed to have been the book that William Morgan was talking about, but it doesn't cover any conspiracies, so it's not the book that William Morgan was going around talking about. It was a distraction from what really was being told. And wouldn't you know that William Morgan had Oliver Cowdery sent to him by his publisher to help him prepare the book for publishing. Oliver Cowdery was good at that, and also got involved with Sidney Rigdon, with the manuscript that Sidney Rigdon was working on, to rewrite Solomon Spaulding's book. And so there's a whole lot more involved that you need to research and study, and I've already come out with a book chronologically listing all the events and when they occurred, and so this shouldn't be new to anybody who has bothered to look at my book, and very few people have. Okay, so let's see. So like I said, the anti-Freemason movement burned the majority of the Freemasonry halls and temples, and one of those Freemasonry halls was a brand new building that had just been built, that Brigham Young's older brothers were Freemasons in, as well as Heber C. Kimball. Those three men were enrolled in that brand new Freemasonry hall. They had gone to another one not too far away, but they had just had a brand new one specifically for them and the people in their immediate area, and the Anti-Freemasonry movement burned it to the ground. And so this is going to indicate motive, in case anybody's keen to legal cases. So the Book of Mormon is a Freemasonry encoded text. You know, the Solomon's Temple Nephi built in the new land. You know, the word adieu. People say, oh, well, it had to be adieu because it means more than just saying goodbye and blah, 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 that apologists give. What's the word before it? Brethren, adieu. When you look at the book attributed to William Morgan, published by the publisher of William Morgan after his disappearance, it talks about brethren, adieu in the text. So it's Freemasonry. That's where it comes from. And then you got the Tree of Life. You know, the Freemasons there in New York were big on Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism has the Tree of Life. Plus, the Tree of Life also has to do with Joseph Smith Sr.'s dreams that he had when he first moved to Palmyra. And Hiram is the one who had the dream of the great and spacious building. So you can see that the Book of Mormon is not historically or archaeologically accurate, but the precepts need to be paid attention to. And the warning that is in the Book of Mormon about a secret combination in the latter days that will destroy the world and the United States, taking over, infiltrating everything to control and dictate people's lives. And then, of course, you know, it talks about the secret bands and Gadian bands and societies with the secret handshakes and the secret code words and all their secret meetings. Freemasonry. They're warning about the infiltration that William Morgan was talking about. And so apparently the Smith family got word of what William Morgan was talking about and needed a way to warn the world of this threat without betraying Freemasonry, because they were Freemasons themselves. And the anti-Freemason movement made it very difficult for any book supporting Freemasonry. And so, yeah, that was the situation then, and there's a lot more that needs to be covered on that, but we're not going to get into it here. It was William Smith, the younger brother of Joseph Smith, who baptizes Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. He goes out on his missionary errand, finds them, gives them a Book of Mormon, and they get baptized by him. And then Brigham Young, after he becomes a member, he is called to go on a mission, but instead of going with a partner, as was commanded, 2 by 2, Brigham Young went on his own. He just took off, and he went all throughout New York and Upper Canada. It's part of his first mission. His second mission was to England, and there's a lot of controversy with that as well. And because he went all by himself, there were a lot of accusations that were thrown around regarding Brigham Young's promiscuity. He was accused of going after other men's wives, and but men that he converted were all former Freemasons who lost their Freemasonry temple in the Anti-Masonic Movement. And these new converts to the church became the Danites, the secret combination group inside the LDS Church. And they had their secret meetings, their secret handshakes, and all that stuff. And they looted, pillaged, plundered, murdered, and burned the houses of their neighbors who were not Mormon, and thus caused the Mormon War that was famously attributed. And so Joseph Smith was not associated with this. It was all Brigham Young's doing. He got the guys, gathered them together, formed a secret group within the church, and they, started doing their works of terror to destroy the church. Okay, and then 1842, after the leadership crisis, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball went to the Freemason Grand Master in the neighboring city and requested that because they had so many Freemasons in the church, that they wanted to be able to have a Freemason lodge there in Nauvoo. But the Grand Master said, well, you can meet, but no lodge yet. And so in 1843, the Grand Master finally agreed to a lodge, and that's when it's popularly known that Joseph Smith became a Freemason. But he only made level 3 out of 32 levels. And he was a long way from the top. So a Master Mason may sound big and important, but in the big scheme of things, it's only level 3 way down at the bottom. 32nd degree Mason is the highest Masonic position. And the 33rd degree Masons, that's an honorary title. And only 32nd degree Masons can attain a 33rd degree honorary title. A 32nd degree Mason or a 33rd degree Mason may reveal the secret elite knowledge held in reserve for those at the top. They can reveal it to those who are 31 and 30 degree Masons, if they feel like it. So the system was set up that at the bottom, everybody was welcome into Freemasonry. You can believe in whatever God you wanted, and there were Freemasonry organizations for every religion: Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Mormon. And they were allowed to have their religious text in the Freemasonry rituals. And that's why we use the King James Version, is because the King James was the Freemasonry choice at the bottom for the Christian religions. But Jewish mysticism was involved, so they knew of the secret codes in Jewish mysticism, the secret symbols, as well as they utilized Egyptian symbols, twisting the interpretations, because Egyptian names weren't discovered until 1820 by Jean Champollion over in the Old World. And a dictionary wasn't finally developed in Egyptian until the late 1800s, long after Joseph Smith died. So they didn't know Egyptian. They just used Egyptian symbols with their own interpretations and their own secret coded messages. And so understand that they didn't know Egyptian. They had their own interpretations. So Joseph Smith didn't know of the secret plans and religion at the top of the Freemasonry, being only a Master Mason. Yet the Book of Mormon outlines the secrets of the 32-degree Masons. So he only could have gotten that from William Morgan. And there's a connection between William Morgan and the church, which you need to study and research, because the very first baptism for the dead was done by Joseph Smith Sr. for William Morgan. And his wife, who married a fellow Freemason who had stayed at their home, lived across the street from Joseph Smith Jr. in Nauvoo. Not a coincidence. There's a connection. Alright, so I'm well past time here, so we'll get to 1844 in the next segment. Okay, now we skip ahead to Joseph Smith's martyrdom, along with Hiram Smith. I had been given special knowledge because my third great-grandfather, John Solomon Fulmer, is the one who stayed with Joseph Smith overnight before his assassination, and in the morning was ordered by Joseph Smith to go get witnesses for his trial. And my third great-grandfather, not wanting to leave Joseph Smith defenseless, gave him his single-shot pistol. I had always known about this. It was passed down through the family, generation after generation. So I'm always considered the weird one, as people hear me talk about the story that Joseph Smith had a gun in his possession in the jail with him. And people would think I was crazy, didn't know what I was talking about, because the church didn't reveal that he had an actual gun. And it wasn't until I don't know when the church finally came out and admitted that Joseph Smith had a gun, but I had always thought that Joseph Smith's, or my third great-grandfather's gun, was the only gun in the jail. It turns out that my ancestor's gun was only a single shot, and that a friend and mentor of John Taylor's had visited them in the jail and gave to Joseph Smith, not John Taylor, his 6-shooter. And so Joseph Smith then gave my third great-grandfather's gun to Hiram, his brother. And so Hiram had my ancestor's gun, and Joseph Smith now had a 6-shooter. And then you have Willard Richards reporting that after this meeting, he then calls to the guard and says, "Get me a whiskey bottle." And it's now revealed that Willard Richards wasn't really getting a whiskey bottle. He was getting a 6-shooter for himself. And as you can see where this is going to go, Joseph Smith was not murdered by a mob. It was an inside job. and it gets really dark and ugly. But the evidence at the scene is that there were 23 bullet holes on the walls. There was only 2 bullet holes in the door. The one in the center of the door, around the headshot, and one at the door latch on the side, and no reports of broken glass. And so the claims that people were shooting through the window doesn't seem to be correct. Plus, they're in the second story, and you can't. The laws of physics are being violated with people's testimonies, is what I'm trying to get at. And the pistols give off a certain size hole when you shoot at an object or at a person than the rifles that were said to be used by the mob at the door. So the traditional story that the church says is that the 4 men in the jail room were unarmed, and that the mob stormed up and started sticking their rifles through the door, and that the 4 of them had to try to push the door shut, and that they were swatting down the rifles, and somebody shot through the door and hit Hiram right there in the face at the nose area, and or I guess over by the eye, around that area, and then Joseph Smith goes to his aid, and yet the mob is still at the doors, so I don't know why they don't burst in. But then Joseph, for some reason, is supposedly running over to the window, and is supposedly saying the Freemason line of the poor man at the window, and then he gets shot and falls to the ground, and he's bludgeoned many more times after. The evidence does not support the witnesses' claims. Period. Somebody is lying, or both are lying. Willard Richards and John Taylor gave contradictory reports of what happened. John Taylor's report was that they were holding back the guard, or the mob, at the door, swatting the guns down, and then for some reason they backed off and started going back down the stairs, and then Joseph Smith went out and shot 3 of the 6 rounds from his pistol. And so that doesn't make any sense. Why are they leaving? And it reveals that Joseph Smith was at the top of the stairs shooting, and because 2 men were hit, 2 of the mob were hit, and you can only fit 1 man up the stairs, and they were hit from the front, not going down the stairs, and so the first one got shot twice, and the second one got shot once. And the witness statement from outside the jail said that the leader of the mob ordered their guns to be lowered because they were to be unarmed. And so they went up single file without rifles, and on the way up, the witness says he heard gunshots, and next thing he sees is the mob rushing down the stairs and out the door. And so, something's going on. And I already have my theory on it, but it's interesting that it's my third great grandfather who is the cause for exposing the inside job that was being done. So what happened to the evidence, you may ask? Because we now have forensic technology available to us to be able to go back to the scene of the crime and determine once and for all what actually happened. So why don't we do that? Could it be that Spencer W. Kimball, as president of the church, had all of the evidence covered up? Because before Spencer W. Kimball came in and messed things up, there used to be a blood stain on the floor with a little glass plaque to protect it, and it said that it was Joseph Smith's blood. Turns out it's Hiram's blood. Isn't that interesting? So Hiram's blood is the pool of blood on the floor, and the 23 bullet holes are all covered up, so we can't check to find out whether it was a rifle or a pistol that made the bullet holes. Because according to the testimonies, it was the rifles that would have sprayed the walls. And what's the spray pattern? Would it be from the rifles sticking through the door, or something else? We'll never know, because Spencer W. Kimball covered it up. But for your curiosity's sakes, and what leads to my theory, is that the bullet in John Taylor's pocket watch is the size of a pistol shot, not a rifle shot, because a rifle shot would have been much bigger, done much more damage. So, yeah, I should tell you. Okay, so my third great grandfather gives Joseph Smith the single shot pistol. John Taylor's mentor gives Joseph Smith his 6-shot pistol. Joseph then gives the single shot to Hiram, and so Hiram and Joseph are armed. Willard Richards sneaks in a 6-shot pistol. There have been a lot more emergencies the last several days. And so when the mob comes, Joseph Smith is being armed, is there at the top of the stairs to greet them, and fires 3 rounds. And at that time, as Joseph Smith is out of the room with his gun, Willard Richards, he stays back out of the scene. It's John Taylor that goes and tries to wrestle my third great grandfather's gun away from Hiram. And in the result of the wrestling, the gun is pointed upwards and is fired up into Hiram. That's the shot that others have claimed was done by the rifles through the door as Hiram was already lying on the ground, having been shot in the head. But that wouldn't be the case to explain the blood on the floor if he was shot in the head standing up. And so with the gunshot going off of my third great grandfather's gun, and Joseph having successfully chased the mob out of the jail, he then turns back to the room to see where the shot came from, and finds that his brother had been shot. And he then pulls the gun on John Taylor, who is seen there and with Hiram having been shot, and fires the remaining 3 rounds at John Taylor, one of them hitting him in his pocket watch. I'd be willing to bet if we did a forensic test on the pocket watch with the gun that there'd be a match, but nobody's testing it. And after the 3 shots by Joseph, John Taylor crawls under the bed to hide, and Joseph then comes into the room, not knowing that Willard Richards has his 6-shooter, and goes to his brother, going, "Oh, my brother." And then Willard Richards, the coward that he is, comes from behind and shoots Joseph, and then blows a hole in Hiram's head, resulting in the blood on the floor. And that seems to cover all of the evidence and the bullets. The shot in John Taylor's backside, in his hip area, I think I've heard one person explain it as that Willard Richards gave John Taylor his 6-shooter, and no, can't be. Oh, Hiram was the one shot in the I'd have to go back and look at the evidence again, but the story that I just told you seems to fit the evidence better than anybody else's explanation. But again, we need to do forensic evidence on the bullet holes and the guns and find out which holes go with which guns. And so that's the controversy in connection with Brigham Young, because Brigham Young was supposed to be on the East Coast promoting Joseph Smith for President of the United States. And instead, he was seen in Nauvoo, and the witness that saw him was threatened by Brigham Young not to tell a soul that he saw him there. So isn't that great? More cover-ups, more conspiracies, and murder involved as well. And let's see. It was also Kimball, by the way, before I get to this next part, that during his presidency allowed Mormons to become Freemasons again. Mormons were denied Freemasonry under Brigham Young, even though Brigham Young created the temple ceremony and it basically established a church of Freemasonry with the Mormon Church. And of course, Spencer W. Kimball is a relative of Heber C. Kimball. So, there you have it. Isn't it nice to have nepotism in the church leadership?